Have you ever had that one neighbor who seems to think the entire neighborhood exists just to follow their rules? Well, let me tell you about the morning I opened my door to find Karen standing there, arms crossed, glaring like she was about to deliver the speech of her life. And trust me, you won't believe what she said next. It was a crisp Saturday morning. The sun was just coming up and I was sipping on my coffee, enjoying the peace before starting my weekend chores. Then came the knock. Firm, repetitive. The kind of knock that instantly tells you, this isn't friendly. I opened the door and there she was, Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, her blonde bob haircut, sat stiff against her shoulders, her HOA badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck like it was some kind of police badge. Without so much as a good morning, she pointed at my driveway. Your truck, she said sharply, is against HOA regulations. You can't park it here. Now, let me pause for a second. My truck isn't some rusted-out junker. It's a polished, well-maintained pickup, my pride and joy, the very thing that helps me run my small landscaping business. It's not only reliable, it's how I make a living. And according to the HOA handbook, there's no rule against parking a personal vehicle in your own driveway. So I asked her calmly, what rule are you talking about? Karen smirked, clearly prepared for this. Section 12, paragraph 3, no commercial vehicles allowed. I almost laughed. My truck has no company logos, no ads, nothing that screams commercial. It's a standard pickup, the same kind dozens of my neighbors drive. But Karen wasn't about to back down. You have 48 hours to remove it, she said, her voice dripping with authority, or the HOA will fine you. Consider this your official notice. The nerve. She had just barged onto my porch, on a Saturday morning no less, and tried to intimidate me into compliance with a rule she didn't even understand. I took a long sip of my coffee, locked eyes with her and said, Karen, you might want to double-check your rulebook before you start threatening people. Her face turned red, but she spun on her heel and stormed off down my driveway. And that's when I knew. This wasn't going to be the last I'd hear about my truck. What Karen didn't realize was that I wasn't about to roll over. She thought she had won the first round, but she had no idea what was coming next. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was a delivery notice, maybe a package left behind. But the second I saw the bold letters at the top, notice of violation, my stomach dropped. Karen had wasted no time. She'd filed an official complaint with the HOA, and now they were demanding I pay a $200 fine for parking a commercial vehicle in a residential area. I stood there on my porch, shaking my head in disbelief. My truck? A commercial vehicle? I couldn't help but laugh. It was absurd. But this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about principle. I tore the notice off my door and walked inside, tossing it on the kitchen counter. As I stood there staring at it, I couldn't help but think, if Karen was willing to bend the rules this far, what else had she been doing to other neighbors? The next evening, while unloading tools from the back of my truck, my neighbor Mike wandered over. He's the kind of guy who notices everything in the neighborhood, but in a good way. Friendly, approachable, always willing to lend a hand. He nodded toward the envelope still stuck under my windshield wiper. Karen after you too, huh? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, too? Turns out Karen had been harassing half the block for months. Everything from lawn heights to the color of garden gnomes. She'd slapped Mike with a fine last month for leaving his garbage cans out too long. Even though he brought them in the same day, it was starting to make sense. Karen wasn't just picking on me, she was on a power trip. And she had been using her role on the HOA, board to bully anyone who didn't bow down to her version of the rules. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let this slide. The next morning, I pulled out the HOA handbook from the welcome packet we'd gotten when we moved in. I sat down at my dining table, flipping through the pages until I found section 12, paragraph 3. And guess what? Karen had quoted it word for word, but conveniently ignored the next line. It clearly stated, exemptions apply to personal vehicles not used for the display or advertisement of a business. There it was. My truck wasn't breaking any rules at all. She had twisted the wording just enough to make it sound like I was guilty. But the actual document proved otherwise. That yellow envelope on my counter, suddenly it wasn't a problem. It was ammunition. And I was ready to fight back. The HOA held its monthly meeting in the community clubhouse. A beige, windowless room that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee. Normally only a handful of residents showed up, but this time, the place was packed. Word had spread about Karen's latest crusade, and people were tired of it. I walked in holding my copy of the HOA handbook under my arm. That yellow violation notice folded neatly inside. Karen was already seated at the head table, posture stiff, lips pursed, shuffling her papers like she was preparing for trial. When our eyes met, she gave me the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all, more like a warning. The meeting dragged through. The usual business until the floor opened for community concerns. That's when I stood up. My voice carried across the room, steady but firm. I received a violation notice this week, I began, holding up the envelope for everyone to see. Karen claims my truck is a commercial vehicle, but according to the HOA handbook, it's not. And I have the proof right here. I unfolded the page and read aloud the exact section, making sure to emphasize the line about personal vehicles being exempt. Murmurs spread across the room. People started nodding, whispering to each other. Karen quickly cut in, her voice sharp. You're twisting the rules. That truck is clearly intended for business use. It's oversized, it carries equipment. Hold on, I interrupted, locking eyes with her. The rules say no vehicles advertising a business. Mine has no logos, no markings, nothing. It's a personal vehicle. The HOA doesn't get to invent new definitions. Just because you don't like the way it looks in my driveway. Applause broke out from the back row. Even Mike clapped his hands together, grinning. Karen's face tightened as the board members glanced uncomfortably at one another. Finally, the HOA president, a soft-spoken man named Alan, cleared his throat. He's right, Alan admitted. The handbook doesn't classify his truck as a violation. The fine has no basis. The room erupted. People started voicing their own frustrations. Stories about unfair fines, nitpicky notices, and Karen's heavy-handed tactics. It was like a floodgate had opened. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her palm against the table. "This is out of order," she barked. "We're here to maintain standards." But it was too late. The tide had turned. Alan looked around the room, then back at her. "Karen, enough. The board will review your actions. For now, this violation is dismissed." The look on her face was priceless, equal parts shock and rage. She had walked into that meeting expecting to humiliate me, but instead, she had been called out in front of the entire neighborhood. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The morning after the HOA meeting, something felt different in the neighborhood. For months, maybe even years, people had been walking on eggshells around Karen, afraid of her constant threats of fines and citations. But now, the fear was gone. It started small. Mike set his garbage cans out a full day early just to see what would happen. Across the street, the Hendersons left their Christmas lights up in broad daylight, even though Karen had sent them 3 notices. Last winter about unseasonal decorations. And me? I made sure my truck was parked front and center in my driveway, shining in the sun like a trophy. Karen noticed. Oh, she noticed. By noon, she was pacing up and down the block, snapping photos on her phone, muttering under her breath like a storm brewing. But this time, when she tried to pass out violation slips, something unexpected happened. People refused to take them. Some even laughed in her face. That night, a group of neighbors gathered in my backyard. It wasn't an official meeting, just a bunch of us sitting around the fire pit, swapping stories about Karen. One by one, people shared how she'd harassed them. Fines for flower pots being the wrong color, threats over kids leaving bikes on the lawn, even a warning to one family about their dog barking too cheerfully. It was unbelievable how much power she had managed to wield simply because no one had stood up to her before. But after what happened at the clubhouse, things were different. People were ready to push back. "Why don't we petition the board?" Mike suggested. "If enough of us sign, they'll have to take action. Maybe even remove her from the HOA committee." The idea caught fire instantly. We drafted a letter right there on my patio table, outlining a list of grievances, citing unfair fines, intimidation, and misuse of HOA authority. Everyone took turns signing their names. By the end of the night, we had more than a dozen signatures, and that was just the beginning. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had never spoken up before suddenly wanted in. By the weekend, we had over 50 signatures. Karen's reign of terror was officially under siege. And as if fate had a sense of humor, she handed us the final piece of evidence we needed. One morning, she marched right onto Mike's property, yelling at his wife about their lawn chairs being too close to the curb. The whole thing was caught on his doorbell camera. Her red face, her shouting, even the moment she threatened them with a $500 fine. When that video made its way around the neighborhood, it was game over. Karen wasn't just disliked anymore. She was exposed. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The petition had circulated across the entire neighborhood, and nearly everyone had signed. People who had once kept their heads down were now standing tall, ready to hold Karen accountable. The clubhouse was more crowded than ever. Folks lined the walls, arms crossed, determination etched on their faces. Karen sat at the head table again, but this time she looked smaller somehow. Her usual smug confidence had been replaced with nervous glances and twitching hands. Alan, the HOA president, opened the meeting with a heavy sigh. He shuffled through the stack of papers in front of him. The petition, the written complaints, and yes, a printed screenshot from Mike's doorbell camera. Neighbors, Alan began, his voice calm but firm. We've received overwhelming feedback regarding the conduct of one of our board members. The evidence is clear. There has been a repeated misuse of authority, unfair fines, and behavior unbecoming of this association. All eyes turned to Karen. She tried to interrupt, fumbling for her papers. This is ridiculous! You're all just ganging up on me because I actually care about this community. But her words only fueled the fire. People from the crowd started speaking up. The Hendersons stood and recounted their ordeal with the Christmas lights. Another neighbor described being fined for a birdbath that was supposedly too decorative. Even Mike, usually the quiet type, raised his voice. You don't care about the community, Karen, he said firmly. You care about control. The room erupted in applause. Karen's face turned crimson as she shouted over the noise, but the more she protested, the more she lost the crowd. Finally, Alan raised his hand, silencing the room. Based on the overwhelming evidence and community petition, the board has voted to remove Karen from her position effective immediately. The words hit like a thunderclap. Karen froze, her jaw hanging open in disbelief. You can't do this. I am the HOA, she screeched, slamming her fist on the table. But the truth was undeniable. The community had spoken, and her power trip was over. She stormed out of the clubhouse, muttering threats about lawyers and illegal proceedings, but no one chased after her. Instead, people cheered, hugged, and for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt united. As for me, I walked home with my head held high, my truck gleaming proudly in the driveway. It was more than just a victory about parking. It was proof that standing up to a bully can change everything. Karen had learned a hard lesson that night. When a community comes together, no amount of intimidation can keep them down. And as I looked at my neighbors smiling and laughing in the street, I knew this wasn't just the end of her reign. It was the beginning of something better.